Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shiji Buzz. Today, we discuss the relationship between pricing and reputation. Since the pandemic, hotels have been increasing prices at an unprecedented pace at a time when staffing shortages have left many hotels struggling to uphold quality and service standards. So far, most hotels have managed to avoid a major backlash in reviews, but all that could change quickly. When will the pricing bubble burst, or will it burst? Today, we're thrilled to have three hotel experts with us to find answers to this question and more. A warm welcome to Chris Lezinski, Group General Manager, Service Operations at Edwardian Hotels, London. Chris.
Good afternoon, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. Very much delighted to be here, and I hope that our lovely audience will benefit from listening to what we have to say. So can't wait for the questions. Thank you.
I'm sure they will. Fernando Vives, Chief Commercial Officer at NH Hotel Group, part of Minor Hotels. Fernando.
Good afternoon, everybody, and again, thank you so much for the invitation.
And finally, Neil James, Chief Operating Officer at Shiji Review Pro. Neil, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for having me as part of the webinar. Great to see everybody online. Looking forward to a great session with a wonderful panel.
I'm Daniel Craig, founder of Renown, and I'll be moderating today's panel on behalf of Shiji. We'll have a live Q&A session at the end of this webinar, so feel free to send in your questions at any time, and all attendees will receive an email link to the recording within the next few days. Now let's jump into our topic. And Chris, I'd like to start with you just to provide some perspective. By how much have hotel rates grown in the past couple of years, and what's the forecast for 2024?
Thank you, Daniel. I think it's fair to say that until the pandemic struck, we have seen a static growth. And then, of course, during the period of lockdowns and immediately post lockdown period, we have seen a big dip in rates. Having said that, if we look at comparison between 2019 and 2022, for us as London operators and Manchester operators, we have seen a rate growth of definitely double-digit scale, in some cases 20-30%. To answer your question about the future, well, depending on the sources you look at, when I looked at American Express Global Business Travel Report, it is indicated that some regions of the world will continue growing at that pace. For us in London, we believe that the growth can come at as high as additional 10 percentage points onto our ADR. So we're very excited. At the same time, we're very well aware that the growth could come with a decline in leisure travel markets. And what is important to also notice is that the ADR growth is not only led by transient prices, but it is also led by the changes to business mix that we have seen and observed over the last 3-4 years. Pre-pandemic, we relied quite heavily on mandated programs. We had quite a lot of static rates. At the moment, we saw an evolution of business mixes moving us towards more transient-led pricing model and off-bar pricing model.
So I wonder how that 10% compares to other hotels. I know it's been a rather contentious budget season with the owners pressuring hotels to promise higher rates and hotels worrying about the impact on operations. Neil, your team just released the latest guest experience benchmark. What does the review data tell us about guest sentiment toward higher room rates?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting, Daniel, because we've heard from Chris how in many cases we're seeing double-digit growth, sometimes 20-30%, and yet it doesn't seem to be having a huge impact on guest experience right now. What we're seeing is, in comparison to the same period last year, with almost 500,000 more reviews. The Global Review Index, which is the Shiji Review Pro Index for online reputation, is actually increased by 1 percentile point compared to the previous period, which across a large data set, that's a significant growth. We're also seeing as well that the value index, which is a rating that guests can put on various OTA sites, etc., is also tracking up by 2.7 percentile points. It's still actually underperforming compared to other indexes, but it's a significant growth compared to the same period last year when we see, the trend of rates going as high as they are. We've also kind of looked a little bit at the semantic analysis data, and we can see that when people speak negatively about a review related to value, it is having an impact on the Global Review Index. It's not significant, however. Other data that we've actually tracked as well, we've kind of looked at a lot of the text to understand, okay, if people talk about value, what are the kind of mentions that they're talking about, right? And in cases we're seeing, yes, people are talking about expensive room rates, which you would kind of expect. But what's interesting is that we're also seeing that people are speaking quite negatively about pricey food and beverage options, right? So not only are guests having to pay increased prices when they get to the hotel for the room, but also they're seeing that there's an increase in the food and beverage options and other amenities. Guests are also talking about the fact that the value for money in relation to quality is questionable. So, they can obviously feel the fact that, they're paying more, but that return on value maybe isn't there. Interestingly, some specific mentions have spoken about the lack of bottled water in the room, right? So they're talking about the fact that you're increasing my rates, but you can't even provide a complimentary bottle of water for me when I'm staying at your property. And then the last thing that I picked up on in the data was expectation setting, I think, is key, right? So we're obviously, guests know that they're paying higher rates. All of us on here have booked our own reservations over the past months and have seen that. However, what seems to be happening is that hotels are not being clear in their communication when it comes to additional charges that the guests may encounter when they get to the hotel, such as car parking pricing, pricing for additional activities if you're at a resort, and so on. So there were quite a few complaints related to misleading information, I would say.
So there have been small signs, but the big backlash that we thought might come hasn't arrived yet. So as far as guest sentiment, it seems like there may be room for growth in room rates as long as the quality standards are upheld. Fernando, you were an early adopter of benchmarking review metrics against rate and RevPAR metrics. Where do you think the breaking point is where a hotel's prices get so high that it results in a backlash of negative reviews?
Thank you so much, Daniel, for the question. And again, thank you to CG for the invitation. It's in the end, my belief is that the breaking point is where prices no longer reflect the value perceived by the guest. And of course, this is an entire process. And in order to understand the process, my belief is that we need to understand the context where we are today. So one of the things that happened during the pandemic, I think it was very good for hoteliers, for the whole industry, to understand the what elasticity of demand really represents. Sometimes we have always tried to push our volumes and understanding that we were in a fight for market share. What the pandemic taught us was that in the end, if there is no demand, why do you need to push the prices down? And that really affected the way strategically we were defining prices. With that in mind, again, what we are reading today is that there is an unlink between the price and the volumes and how this is affecting, because what hoteliers are facing is the incremental costs that we are suffering in every single line of the P&L. And with that, we know that if we want to continue surviving and delivering the margins, or at least margins that bring us profitability, we need to continue pushing rates up. So in the end, more than just looking at the reviews, is understanding that we need to offset the incremental costs that we have. I do see that there is going to be a transition where consumers have a framing on what they have paid in our hotels in the past and what they are paying today. And probably what they will understand is that what we were charging before will not be in the market ever, because we will not be able to sustain our cost either. Now, it's true that there is willingness to pay because there is willingness to travel. And I think we are seeing a major shift as well on how the demand is behaving, how people spend everything they could during the pandemic on things, and now they want to spend on experiences. And I think that's very beautiful for the industry, where we will consider having these experiences that at one point in time during the pandemic, people thought that we would either have meetings, events only virtually as a meeting we have today or the event we have today. But what we are seeing is that every single segment is recovering over 2019 numbers. I think there are only some exceptions. So with that in mind, I think that, again, companies and companies such as Minor Hotels, where we operate 8 brands, we need to continue working on our value proposition so that we do not see this value for money going down, as the willingness to pay and the framing from the consumer gets stable. And again, people understand that this is the price that you will need to pay if you want to stay in any of our brands. But the brand proposition is key, together with the operational promise and on how we are delivering that experience to our consumers.
So room rates aren't going down. Is that what you're saying?
Yep. I don't think so. I don't think so. One of the things, and as you were saying this, I'm sorry to interrupt, Daniel, is that one of the things that we've seen even during the pandemic, and as we left the pandemic, is the lack of price wars in most of the markets. So even when the demand was going down, we haven't seen any price wars in most of the markets, at least where we operate, and we operate in over 55 countries. So with that, it gives us a big scope on the understanding of the evolution. And this is something that, again, we will see if this happens in the future, but hopefully we will be able to keep prices where they are today.
Because part of that, as you were saying, the hotels have no choice because costs have gone up so much. So in real terms, it looks like rates have gone up a lot, but in real terms, maybe not so much. Okay, Chris, I want to come back to you. I know that you too are passionate about harmonizing guest satisfaction and revenue strategy. How will hoteliers know if sentiment toward pricing has changed?
It's a very good question, Daniel. And in fact, I have just been asked if our company, Edwardian Hotels London, have run analysis to find the impact of online reputation and our ADR. So in my view, at present, hospitality has got a great variety of business intelligence tools available: RMS, PMS, Review Flow, online reputation, guest satisfaction surveys. It's very important to remember that not always is the price the main driver behind value for money. And in fact, very frequently we see that the lower the price, the more challenging online reputation becomes. I think it is very important that us in the business, we do understand that every customer comes with different expectations. One might be looking for the best rate out there, and some will prioritize experience and amenities. And I think that in terms of sentiment, as you have said, we have seen growth this year in our online reputation. We have seen growth to quite significant level, way beyond that 1.2 percentage points that Neil has mentioned. And very frequently, the value for money aspect does not originate from the price position. In fact, when we look at our Review Pro analysis, very frequently, our value for money metric is impeded by an issue that was experienced at the hotel level, and more importantly, was not followed through. The paradox of a problem turning into loyalty is well present and evident. And I think that it is very, very important to having the data available and having all the systems available to be able to draw the right conclusions and to be able to come up with local strategies to mitigate an impact of poor online reputation. Ultimately, if the market remains buoyant, as Fernando mentioned, the price will continue
But that's an interesting comment you made, that if you lower rates, it actually has an impact, a negative impact on reputation. Can you explain that a bit more?
Certainly. I mean, if we are operating hotels on 4 and 5 star level, we are targeting specific audience and specific group of travelers. London is an expensive city. A single room in London can cost in excess of £200. Just going on, very frequently, and we've noticed that post-pandemic as well, is that with specific clientele, with specific audience group, the offering of hotels might be perceived in a different, frequently negative way to what your, let's call them, usual guests would experience. So an experienced traveler coming to London are aware that rooms in central London are small. At the same time, if I travel post-pandemic at a lower rate value and it is a one-off for me, I would have expected probably a bit more for that. And that's where this comes from. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you go off brand, discount your prices, you attract it, probably not your ideal guest, and that's where the problems arise. And certainly when it comes to, maybe they'll get a good deal on the room, but they're still going to find your regular pricing in the restaurant and in the other areas. And that's where sometimes complaints about value come from. Okay, thank you, Chris. I want to move to Neil. I get back into a bit of the data here. So how do guest reviews affect a hotel's pricing power? Neil.
Yeah, so there was a quote that Fernando said, which I liked, which is, right now there's a willingness to pay because people are willing to travel, right? And I think right now we understand that demand is there and the prices are super, super high. However, we are still in a competitive marketplace, right? So when we're looking at our online reputation, we still need to be able to make sure that our online reputation is well managed, and that we have the ability to drive those extra rates based on our quality being perceived to be that much better than our competitive set. There was a study that we did some years back now with Cornell that and STR that identified that as you manage your online reputation better and you grow your global review index, you have a possibility then to drive additional revenue into your revenue per available room. And that was based on many years ago. Imagine how that result would look these days with ADRs and RevPARs sitting where they are right now, right? So I think as we kind of continue to go through this particular bubble, as we're calling it right now, whether or not it bursts, we need to obviously make sure that we continue to manage those reviews, understand what the feedback is from our guests, understand what are the points at the core of that experience for the guests that really impact their stay, understand how we're managing the quality, right? Because at the end of the day, all of this feedback that's coming in, that feedback is for us to understand what changes can we make to the guest journey, to the product itself, to the service that we're giving, in order to be able to make sure that if our guests are paying more money, then they have the ability to obviously to perceive a better satisfaction of their stay. And if we continue to manage that, monitor it daily, weekly, monthly within our properties, then we obviously have an opportunity to drive higher rates because we're confident of what's going on in the market. I mentioned it earlier, expectation setting is super key here, right? Making sure that guests know exactly what it is that they're coming to receive as a product and an experience at our property, and ensure that we're using management responses of reviews to kind of set those expectations, and other channels like messaging these days that our guests are interacting with us more and more. So how can we make sure that we set all of those expectations so that when they actually get to the property, there's no surprise. They are receiving hopefully better service and a better product than what they actually expected. And that then obviously ensures that the guests will generate positive reviews. And this has a huge impact then when guests are looking to book properties in the near future. And we have to think about the fact that we have to continue to manage that reputation and set those expectations, because right now we have this demand. Everybody wants to travel. But if that bubble bursts, we need to make sure that our reputation is still good and that it's still outclassing our competitors, so that if it does burst and all of a sudden people have a lot of choice because of the fact that hotels do start to drop their rates, then the first thing people will be looking at will be your reviews online, right? So how can we ensure that we continue to control that, continue to set the right expectations, and deliver a good service to maintain that and drive pricing power now, but also understand how that is going to impact the future as well.
So you think people pay more attention, travelers pay more attention to reviews and reputation when demand is low and there's more choice?
For definite, because there is more choice, right? When the prices start to come lower, then all of a sudden a 4 or a 5-star property becomes in budget, right? And I will start to look at that, whereas maybe previously I was looking at a 3-star or a 4-star. So as that pricing starts to drop down and I, as a guest, all of a sudden have a lot more options, I'm going to pay a lot more attention to the reviews and what people are saying before I actually make my choice, right?
It's interesting because the strategy for many hotels right now with rates is let her rip. You know, if they pay them, keep it going. But, you know, there's a question there whether that's going to have long-term consequences. There's been some interesting questions and comments in chat and Q&A. And Fernando, there was one directed to you specifically. Did you want to take a moment to respond to it?
Well, thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you so much to the attendees who are asking questions. Very interesting. It's on regards to Aida Muñoz. Hola, Aida. Who I know very well. She asked what Fernando is saying is theory, but in practice, hotels need to adapt to what the competition is doing or having a much better reputation based on value proposition. Absolutely, yes. I think this is what we need to do, is working on the value proposition. It's there is another question, which is if there is any correlation between the guest satisfaction index and the RGIs. I mean, we are looking at everything that you can measure. I think there is no KPI in the industry that we are not measuring, that we are not trying to find correlations one to each other. The reality is that indeed, even if we try to look at these correlations, we are not finding it in many destinations, because as I said before, at some point in time, the only way we can survive and we can continue pushing our margins is by, again, pushing our rates. Now, the reality is that as much as we can say, and I would love to be able to lead the prices on every market where we operate, in the end, everything is related to the market dynamics. So while we do advanced revenue management practices, it's the broader market dynamics that it's largely dictating at the price points that we have in the market. So it would be probably stupid from our perspective if we see that the market is going with the prices up, even if our value for money, even if our quality may not be where we would like to not push the rates as the competition is doing. So in the end, you have to work with the balance between these two factors, 100%. I think I answered both questions, Daniel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. And I was just reading the questions and comments, and it's great. Keep them coming. We will get to the Q&A at the end, but if we can, like we just did, we'll try to answer a couple of them on the fly. Fernando, could you quickly, I mean, you teach master's level university students in revenue management. I'd be curious to know if a hotel's review scores are suffering. It's a little case study for your students. If hotel review scores are suffering due to high rates, but demand is still strong, what would you recommend your students do?
It's a great question. And actually, this class I teach together with Neil at Universidad Rey Juan Carlos in Madrid. And the answer is very clear. I will recommend them to continue pushing rates as much as they can if the demand keeps on growing. So in the end, as I said before, there are different metrics. One of them is the reservation curve. understanding how the demand is behaving. And the KPIs that we measure is MPI, the CQI, which I personally call internally the Quality Penetration Index. CQI is the Review Pro Index, where we measure our quality against the competition, and the average rate index. And there are a few other KPIs that we take into account, which is the value for money. And lately, what we are analyzing is the evolution of our NPS, which is giving us a sense as well on how much, how many customers are actually giving us a 9 or are giving us a 10 out of the different internal surveys that we are launching in our properties. Now, that would be the purely revenue management answer. And what we teach as well at university to these same students is that what they need to do is they need to sit down with the operations team, depending on how their organization is, and they need to continue working on the value proposition. And from the revenue management perspective, they need to see how they are making, not only increasing rates for the entry-level room, but how they are managing, how they're doing inventory management. So they are pushing higher categories, how they are adding value added to those rooms, how they are adding value to the breakfast. If most of the revenue is coming, or the acquisition of breakfast has certain level of percentages, like a 60 or a 70%, how they are packaging the suites, and most important, if they have an upselling program within their front desk, so that if they know that they have, for whatever reason, had to overbook the entry-level room, how they can put in value that the customer may receive a higher category by even pay more. And by pay more, in the end, represents that they will have a better experience, because otherwise they would have to say, no, I'm not interested. I'm just here for the bed. So with that in mind, we need to continue, again, working on the value proposition. There was another question looking at the F&B component. One of the things that we are doing, at least since the end of the pandemic, because we were seeing at some point in time our value for money going down in some cases, is looking at the whole experience. So we have changed our value position for food and beverage. We have enhanced our spa experience in those hotels where we have spas. We have improved through digitalization our check-in and check-out through a product called Fast Pass, which allows customers to choose the room, check in online and check out online in over 300 hotels in the company worldwide. So working on this direction, and many other projects that I cannot disclose that are working on that area, on how we can keep on pushing and improving our value position for the guests.
Brings me to an anecdote I shared with both of you earlier, or all of you earlier. This summer, many of us who were lucky enough to get a vacation experienced as travelers the sticker shock of how much room rates have increased. And for example, I rent with my family a house on the beach every year. And this year it went up, the price went up by 30%. And I know inflation, but my wages hadn't gone up by 30% in that period. But the thing was, nothing about the experience itself had changed. And it was a good experience, but not great. So we decided we're not going back. Chris, what's your take on this? How do you think hotels can protect their reputation and keep their guests loyal while still growing room rates? I know Fernando touched on some of the things his company is doing. What's your take?
Well, I think that the most important thing is to digitize. I think that it's absolutely essential to create a robust CRM practice. I would like to have known that you stayed with me before. And I think that had this fact been known to the operator, that you stayed before, together with what my predecessors were speaking about, review of added value, review of value proposition, being able to identify you as a loyal customer who probably needs an additional enhancement in order to justify the price tag, would have not made you feel the way you did. Moreover, I believe that loyal guests, membership-wise, loyalty-wise, absolutely need to be recognized for being so. And I think that lack, it was just an ordinary experience for you. It sounds like none of what I have just mentioned happened to you during your stay. And as a result of that, you end up with a perception of, right, not only is it more expensive, but it really wasn't anything out of ordinary. Moreover, it also appears to me that you haven't had the chance to express your thoughts about your experience, and nobody gave you the opportunity to answer the question, was everything up to your satisfaction? And I think that moving forward, if hotels are to grow rates, I mean, there was a number of different questions here that came along. Of course, there are correlations. There is a correlation between an arrival experience, how efficient it is, how emotionally intelligent it is. Can I create a connection with my guests? Can I make them feel comfortable, valued? There is a huge dependence on, someone mentioned F&B. For city center hotels, breakfast element is crucial. So good arrival plus good breakfast plus a decent room, more often than not, gives you a benchmark high guest satisfaction. And to your example, I think that you simply were ignored as a loyal customer. Nobody has said to you, thank you for coming back. Thank you for your ongoing loyalty. Thank you for the credit of trust. Anything we can do better for you to make you stay more comfortable. And that also comes back to the review of our operating model. Here in Edwardian, we are dynamically reviewing our operational modeling. We are reviewing our customer journeys with the critical question of, is the current customer journey fit for purpose? And can it still be relevant if we put the price up by 10, 15, 20, 30%, or whatever the metric is? All of a sudden, you get to conclusion that it is no longer about simply the hotel experience. What about pre-arrival? I believe strongly that hotels need to move from simply facilitating an experience into almost curating it. The moment you make a reservation, has anyone contacted you, sent you an email, told you, hi Daniel, thank you very much for booking in. We very much look forward to having you with us. Anything we can do ahead of your stay to make you stay more comfortable. In fact, I believe that the more expensive the experience becomes, the more bespoke it needs to be. And to be able to give you a bespoke experience, I need to know more about you. And for that to happen, we need to embrace technology. And I think that this is that customer cycle together with customer journey that are in capacity to add that value and to retain you and make you come back.
I do think that if there were certain small things that the owner had done to make the experience a bit more special while they were making 30% more, and of course their costs have gone up as well. Even getting back to Neil's comment earlier about, you're paying so much for a room and then you get dinged for 10 euros or whatever for a bottle of water in the room. That sometimes can tip the scales. So those small gestures, little details, as well as that loyalty that Chris was talking about. Okay, we're running out of time, and I do want to get to the Q&A because there's some good questions coming in, some of which we've actually responded to already. But before that, Neil, can you tell us a bit more about how hoteliers can analyze the relationship between their own pricing and reputation?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Daniel. So I think we've already kind of touched on it a couple of times throughout the session, and it's a regular topic in the Q&A by the looks of it as well, and that is being able to track what we call the competitive quality index, which is your GRI divided by the GRI of your comp set, and measuring that against the revenue generation index in tools such as STR, for example, right? So in Shiji Review Pro, we have a tool called the Revenue Optimizer that actually enables you to kind of put on a matrix exactly where your hotels sit within your group in relation to quality and revenue generation, right? And this is a great way in order for you to be able to understand, okay, where do your hotels sit? What's the pricing that I'm setting for my particular properties at the moment in relation to quality? And then do I have an opportunity to be able to drive those rates, right? Because one of the things as revenue managers we know is that if our quality is sitting that well against our competition, well then we're comfortable in asking for a higher rate, and we'll continue to ask for a higher rate, knowing that maybe the quality will drop a bit at a time, and we'll decide where that threshold is that we're comfortable with, right? So that's super key to be able to keep an eye on and understand exactly where you sit in relation to your competitor set. I think other things that obviously a lot of hotel groups are doing these days, and independent hotels, is to use the APIs that companies like Shiji Review Pro offer in order to be able to pull a lot of this guest data, whether that's reputation or survey data, into tools such as BI tools, right? And understand the correlations not only to guest satisfaction, but to employee satisfaction and also to profit, right? So exactly bringing all of those metrics into the one place in order to understand, okay, if my staff are happy, my guests are happy, I can get more rate, then, you know, I can drive more profit. So how can I kind of bring all of those data points together? Also in our survey functionality, what a lot of customers are doing is being able to track the satisfaction, you know, for leisure guests versus corporate. How do I need to change that experience? How does the arrival for a corporate guest differ to the arrival of a leisure guest, right? How do I need to change that? Coming back to what Chris was saying earlier about, you know, making it very personal. But then also track against channels, you know, many people tend to think, oh, you know, I need to be careful of OTAs because I want to focus on Book Direct. I do, but I also have a lot of loyal guests that continue to choose my brand, but continue to book through the OTAs. So how can I make sure that I'm keeping an eye on that and, you know, listening to the feedback that's coming in from them? And then just for time, I'll stop on this one, I think, which is thinking about as well how the satisfaction in surveys can give us data related to what Fernando was saying earlier, related to room types, right? How can I generate more revenue from room types? We have a client that actually was looking at the survey data in Shiji Review Pro and identified that their most satisfied guests were staying in their premium rooms rather than the standard rooms. So when they were going through a refurb program, they actually decided to stop the refurb program for standard rooms and change that to be a refurb program for executive rooms. Why? Well, because first they were able to ask for a higher rate. And secondly, the survey data showed that those guests were leaving the hotel more satisfied and leaving positive reviews online. So actually, that is increasing my global review index and therefore giving me the opportunity to further drive price online, right? So it's kind of looking at that data, not just, you know, using reputation management to respond to reviews, but actually using that data to drive very key decisions about how we strategically price our properties as we move forward.
And yeah, so really digging deep into your own data, your own hotel or hotel's company's data, and looking for correlations, understanding that business trends might not apply to your property or your brand. As Tarandeep, who's had some great questions in our Q&A and notes here, thank you, Tarandeep, but he was just talking about how the relationship between guest satisfaction and pricing does it vary by brand, not by brand, but by hotel type, by category, whether luxury or mid-scale, etc. I do want to ask one more quick question before we jump into our Q&A, and we are running out of time as usual. But Fernando, can you tell us a little bit about how hotels can get reputation and revenue teams working together? Because so often they operate in silos. So they can drive both pricing, power, and value perception at the same time.
Thank you. Well, in the end, it's all a question of communication and collaboration between the teams. And this is what is key. And what we call it internally, it's the powerhouses. It was a point in time before the pandemic where we even had powerhouses in the different regions and in different countries. The powerhouse was a team of 4 people, which was the operations director, the revenue director, marketing director, and sales director. Of course, do not think that we have this kind of teams on every single region. We are not that rich, but we had at least 2 or 3 people, and always revenue management, sales, and operations. They were always there. And why is this? Because we believe that in the end, marketing is creating the demand, sales is capturing this demand, revenue management is optimizing the demand, and then operations is doing the most important part, which is delivering the operational promise with that value proposition that we have built for every single brand that we operate. So all these four forces, they all need to work together. So if you would draw four circles, they all concentrate in the center, and this is where you create this powerhouse, being being able to tackle and to embrace the different data that is available, so that you can change and you can steer the business on any direction, creating more demand, capturing more sales, optimizing better that demand, or just improving the operational promise that we have depending on the brand. Now, it's true that, and Chris mentioned this, which is embracing technology. So I remember 15, 20 years ago, where we had to go on Excel and look at this data manually, where we had to put all the customer survey data on an Excel spreadsheet, where we had to go to STR data, copy and paste, and then inventing these different KPIs to find these correlations. I mean, today, I think the beauty is that technology allows us to have access to these data with companies such as Shiji Review Pro by the push of a button. So this is saving a lot of time. And in the end, it's taking us to a point which I believe is crucial when we talk about communication and collaboration, which is democratizing that data. And this is where revenue management needs to stop being a silo, but being able to have all this data, not just to improve your pricing, but to share with every single department so that you can steer the business in these four directions: on demand creation, optimization, and of course, on the operational promise. And then last but not least, in the end, I do believe, and pretty much in line with what Chris is saying, is that the best loyalty program is not the loyalty program that is giving you points, is the having access to hotels which are driving and giving exceptional experiences to our guests. And this is what is going to create not loyal customers, but fans. And if you are on a chain like ours, which we are operating 550 hotels, when somebody is looking for a hotel in any destination and they see any of our brands, they know that that value proposition that the brand has is strong enough to continue booking that hotel. And I would say even regardless on the price that we have at that point in time for that specific date and for that specific hotel.
Okay, there's been some chatter about in the chat about related to other revenue, because of course we've been focusing on room revenue, and every good hotelier knows that you need to focus on total revenue and profitability. Chris, this is a question for you. Tarandeep and Pablo both commented on other revenue and profitability, and Tarandeep was mentioning about dynamic pricing for not just rooms, but for every revenue stream. How does that fit into the conversation, or how from your perspective at Orient Hotels London, how are you managing that?
I think to answer this question, it's important to understand the structure of your own hotel. What is it that gives you the highest revenue gain? At Orient Hotels, predominantly are rooms-led property. We do, of course, offer meetings and events and food and beverage outlets, but I think that you need to think of it from an added value perspective. So we have a beautiful hotel in Manchester, which is the Edwardian Manchester, part of Radisson Collection. That hotel is a house to one of our best restaurant concepts we have, which is Peter Street Kitchen. Guests coming to Edwardian Manchester are more than happy to spend 250 quid for a dinner for two, providing that it's available. So I think to answer the other part of the question, yes, we were looking at the ability to revenue manage spa treatment. But I think the answer is, do you have demand for it first and foremost? If you have too much demand, maybe you can expand operating hours. Maybe you can look at the actual variety of treatments that you have. But in essence, I believe that you need to stick to your core, whatever that core is, and then build around it in the name of added value. Because let's be honest about it, if you have a rooms-led hotel and 80–90% of your revenues are generated through rooms, you will not be able to shift it to a much more significant part if you, for example, start looking at F&B or at spas. That still will remain as a part of your, let's say, ground floor experience. And by all means, these elements, of course, need a specific strategy. But I think that more often than not, every hotel needs to understand what is it that drives customers to my doorstep. And the moment we know that, we should be able to grow that accordingly. And I mean, I love using Review Pro surveys. I think that it's such a incredible chest of knowledge. You can really point out trends. You can look at specific sentiments that your guests are providing. And I think that every hotelier who's got access to business intelligence should absolutely make the most of it, because the answers are there. The answers are there. I can guarantee you that. It is just how you read the data, how you use the data, and how well can you translate the data set into action that will be decisive on your success factor.
If I could just add to that, Daniel, really quickly. Daniel, you're on mute.
Go ahead, Neil. I was going to ask you to contribute. Go for
Great.
it.
So I was just going to say that I think, you know, as Chris was saying, there's a lot of data that can be seen related to the surveys, but also to the semantics that comes in from the various reviews. So you can identify pretty quickly the impact of food and beverage is having on guest experience in general and your ability to drive additional revenue. But I think as well, the other thing is, you know, we've talked a little bit in this about technology, and I think there's a lot to be said related to the dynamic pricing and revenue management principles in relation to food and beverage and other ancillary items. But also the other thing as well is about using technology to become more efficient and make sure that we're actually offering what the guest is looking for. So one of the tools that we have at Shiji is the Shiji Digital Dine, and this is a digital offering of food and beverage within the rooms, within the lounge areas, within the terraces, etc. And we've actually seen hotels that have implemented this actually increasing average check price, doubling their F&B revenue just by implementing a tool that all of a sudden, you know, enables guests to see, oh, wow, look at all this food and beverage offering. I can choose when I want, what I want. I can look at the images. I haven't got the guilt of a waiter looking over my shoulder. So actually, I'll order the 2 puddings rather than the 1, etc. Right. So it's also not only looking at the revenue management tools, but also understanding, okay, what other avenues may be there that can actually quite simply and easily be implemented and help to drive that additional revenue through the various outlets that we have at the property.
Thank you, Neil. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. We've run out of time, and I feel that we just scratched the surface, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see what 2024 brings us in terms of hotel pricing and reputation. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everybody's questions. A big thanks to our panelists for sharing your expertise today. Chris Lezinski of Edwardian Hotels London. Chris, thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for your time.
Fernando Vives of NH Hotel Group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Fernando, great to have you. And Neil James of Shiji Review Pro. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you to the panelists and to everybody online.
And a reminder that all listeners will receive a link to this recording, and you'll find all episodes of the Shiji Buzz in the Knowledge Hub at shijigroup.com. I'm Daniel Craig of Renown. On behalf of Shiji, thanks to all of you for joining us today. We'll see you again at the next episode of the Shiji Buzz.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.